Great. I think we're ready to start.
Okay. Well, awesome. Well, welcome to my kitchen in Vermont from wherever you're watching. I'm assuming most of you are probably watching from Michigan, but maybe you're not. Maybe you're anywhere. That's the beauty of these classes is you can watch from anywhere, and I can teach from anywhere. So tonight, we are going to do some weeknight dinners. So I'm going to be really ambitious and I'm going to do 2 dinners in 60 minutes. But you really only have to do 1 dinner in 60 minutes. And actually both of these dinners, I really feel like you can do them in less than an hour, especially with a little bit of pre-planning and yeah, a little bit of organization. So that's what I'm going to try to teach you tonight. If you didn't get the recipes, we're going to do a Mexican lasagna. I know I really shouldn't use the word lasagna, but it's a Mexican layered casserole. And then we're going to do a creamy polenta with some veggies and some beans. Both of the recipes theoretically could be vegan. The Mexican lasagna might be a little tougher to pull off unless you just substituted the cheese with vegan cheese, then it wouldn't be. But the polenta doesn't need to have any cheese at all, any dairy at all. So both of them can theoretically be vegan if you want them to. But this is the version I'm going to do is going to be a vegetarian version. So there will be cheese in it. Just a little kind of like heads up, if you do have questions as I'm going along, feel free to type them in the chat. And Libby will relay them to me, or if she wants to unmute you and you want to ask the question, I don't know, however that works, but whatever's easiest, feel free. If I'm talking and something pops up that you have a question about, ask me. So the way I'm going to start is I'm going to start with, I'd love for both of these things to be done and finished so you could see what the finished product looks like. So in order to do that, I need to do the one that needs to bake in the oven first. So we're going to start with our Mexican lasagna. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my pan on because I'm going to make the sauce and cook everything together. And then we're going to layer it and put it in the oven. So I'm going to get my skillet nice and hot, put some oil in it, and grab my knife. So we're going to start out with some onions and some peppers and a little bit of garlic. And one of the nice things about this recipe is if you did want to make it even easier on yourself, and I've done it this way as well, and you didn't want to have to basically make a salsa, which is what we're going to do. We're going to take tomatoes and onions and peppers and garlic. So we're kind of making a cooked salsa. You could substitute the can of tomatoes that we're going to use with a jar of salsa. And you can make the lasagna with just a jar of salsa and all the rest of the ingredients. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to actually make our red sauce. So I'm just going to chop up a little bit of onion here. And the nice thing is you could use your favorite salsa and you can change it up every time. Or you can also, if you're going to use the tomatoes and you want to add any other vegetables, you want to do some sauteed zucchini in there. You want to throw carrots in there, whatever you want to throw in the vegetable mix with the tomatoes, it's totally fine. It's going to be your layered Mexican casserole. So whatever works for you. So I'm going to go ahead and put some oil in my pan. And then go ahead and toss my onions in. And then I'm going to chop up, I'm actually going to take my garlic. So here's a little tip about garlic. When you're cooking with garlic, it's got, we're always told garlic's so good for us. And why is garlic good for us? It's got anti-inflammatory, it's antifungal, it's all sorts of good things for us. But what you don't know about it is in order for our bodies to really use why garlic's so good for us, it's really helpful if when we're cooking with garlic, I'm just peeling the garlic here now. When we're cooking with garlic, if we cut it and chop it, however we're going to chop it, and let it sit on our cutting board for even 5 or 10 minutes, it activates something called allicin, which I always love to say because that's actually my name. It's spelled differently, but that's the compound in garlic that's really good for us. And somehow by chopping it and letting it sit, we activate that. So next time you're making something with garlic, just cut the garlic first and put it to the side of your board, and then go on with the rest of the recipe and add it afterwards. Helpful hint. So one thing about my classes, I do like to try to give you not just the recipe, but just interesting information about it. Also, I really like to share my tips working in kitchens for many, many years. You learn different things that can be applicable for home cooks. But home cooks don't necessarily learn those things at home because you're generally cooking one meal at a time. When you're cooking in a professional kitchen, you're cooking a lot of different things at once. So you really need to learn time management. So what I try to teach is for you to do time management at home, even though you're not cooking 5 dinners at once. Hopefully you're not cooking 5 dinners at once or your family's way too picky. But it'll teach you also just when you're making one meal, you'll just feel calmer, you'll feel more organized, and cooking will become much more joyful. And that's my goal with teaching people how to cook, is that cooking can be joyful and it can be relaxing if you know what you're doing. And, all it takes is practice, just like anything. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and got a yellow pepper here. You can use whatever kind of pepper you want. Okay, clean up. Got my little compost bucket over here. And then just a quick little chop. At the same time, I also have my water going for my polenta because I'm going to get that started as well. Well, I'll try not to jump around too much between the two recipes and try to focus on one at once. All right, so we've got our little pepper here. I'm going to go ahead and add it to the onions. Okay, and I'm actually going to add my garlic now. I could let it sit on the board a little bit longer, but for the sake of television that we have here, I want to keep things moving along. We give it a little stir. And then I'm going to leave it alone. When you're putting things in a pan to saute, it's really helpful to let them sit for a little while. Sometimes I've learned from doing my in-person cooking classes when I would have a room full of people, 10 or 12 people, and we're cooking and we're working on a recipe and people are standing at the stove and they're stirring and they're stirring and they're stirring and they're stirring their vegetables that they're trying to saute. And the vegetables never had have a chance to sit in the pan, develop all those flavors, get all that caramelization if you keep moving them around. So let them sit in the pan, let them do their thing. And then when they're ready, you give them a little toss when you need to. But I think people feel like they have to do something while they're cooking. So they go and they try to move things around. If you're stirring a pot of soup, it's one thing. But when vegetables are sauteing, you want to just let them do their thing. That's my PSA on don't touch your vegetables. So I am going to add a little salt and pepper to it. And again, depending on what other seasonings you want to put in there, we're also going to go ahead and add a little bit of cumin and a little bit of chili powder to it. Again, if you were using salsa, you would be saving all these steps. But again, it's more fun to kind of create your own. So a little bit of chili powder in there. And some cumin. Okay, now I'm gonna let it sit and do its thing for a couple of minutes. In the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and start my polenta. So polenta goes by a lot of names. Some people call it grits. It's really the same thing. Polenta, grits, cornmeal. They're basically all cooked cornmeal in different textures, depending where you are. If you're in Italy, it's polenta. If you're in the South, it's grits. In my mind, I'm sure there might be more subtle differences, but generally, if you're using a medium to coarse grind cornmeal, not the kind necessarily the cornmeal that you might make a cornbread with, although you could make cornbread with it. Not a really fine grind cornmeal. We want one that it's like sandy, basically you're looking for. So a medium to a coarse grind. So if we're using that, it could take a little bit longer. Again, a medium grind versus a coarse grind. So it's hard to give exactly how long your polenta is going to take. Generally, I think my recipe, I don't know how I got 15 minutes, but it's going to take at least 30 minutes. I think I was not thinking when I was typing. I think it says 15 minutes in there. It'll take at least 30 minutes if you have a medium grind. If it's more of a coarse grind, it might take longer. But while I was doing a little bit of research on my polenta versus grits, I came upon a kind of a hack in terms of how to have the polenta cook a little bit quicker. And apparently you can soak it just like you would soak beans. And you can soak it in the full amount of the water that you are going to cook it in if you want overnight. But I think even just a couple of hours would be really helpful. So that's what I did actually this afternoon. I just put the cornmeal. I didn't use the full amount of the water. I just put it to soak the cornmeal. So maybe a cup out of the 5 cups that I'm going to use. So now I'm going to add that soaked cornmeal to my boiling water and let it start cooking. Then I'm going to give it a little bit of salt as well. This is my favorite little salt dispenser, as you wish. I don't believe in salt shakers. I don't believe in putting things in that you can't feel how much salt you're putting in. Plus, half the time, if you're using a salt shaker, you really can't even see how much is coming out. And I don't usually measure salt with a spoon. So, but you certainly could use a spoon with this. But I really like using my fingers because, again, depending on the type of salt you use, I could do a whole class on salt. Because I feel it's very underused in most home kitchens, because when people go out to eat, they say, why did it taste so good? Because the chef most likely used salt. And I feel people are afraid of using salt. Again, if you're using a lot of processed foods, there's enough salt in there. You don't need this. But if you're using mostly whole foods and you're cooking grains, you're cooking beans, and there's no salt naturally in those things, the way they're going to taste better is a little bit of salt in there. And I say a little bit of salt because what salt does chemistry wise is it actually changes the way the food behaves cooking, but it also changes the way you perceive it. So I don't necessarily use salt to make things taste salty. I just use salt to make things taste better, if that makes sense. So a little bit of salt in my water, and I've got my polenta kind of at a low simmer. I don't want it to cook too quickly. So I want to make sure that it stays at a nice low simmer, especially because I'm going to be doing many things at once. So I don't want the water to boil out. I don't want it to evaporate. So I'm keeping it very low. Get that done. And giving it a quick stir so it can just behave. And I have almost the full amount of water in there. And then I've got a little bit of boiling water in my kettle, so I can add to it if I need more. Typically, when you make polenta, you can make it and you can eat it a variety of ways. So the recipe that I have here, we're going to put it in a bowl and top it with things. So we want a loose, creamy sort of polenta, almost the consistency of, say, a soft scrambled eggs. But the other way you can eat polenta, if we cooked it with a little bit less water and we wanted to put it in a pan, it would firm up, and then we could cut it into little squares and we could fry it, and it would be delicious, crispy polenta. We could also do that with the leftovers. So once we've cooked the polenta and we've eaten whatever we want to eat, we can pour the leftovers into a pan, put them in the fridge overnight, and they'll firm up, and then you can cut them into little triangles and you can have them for breakfast, and they're delicious for breakfast. You could put an egg on it. You can put syrup on it if you'd like it sweet. You can put maple syrup on it, all sorts of things. So I'm going to go and check on my onions and peppers here now. And now I'm going to add my tomatoes. I should read my recipe to make sure that I didn't forget anything. All right. Yep. Add the tomatoes. And then I'm going to add my beans and my greens. And I'm just using canned diced tomatoes. Okay, I'm just giving my polenta a little stir. Okay, I have it really low because I don't want it to be splattering everywhere. And then for beans, you can use whatever you want. You can use, just looking for my can opener. You can use refried beans, you can use whole beans, you can use canned beans. You can use cooked beans. I actually am going to use a combo. I've got a can of black beans here, and then I have pinto beans that I cooked, and I keep in my freezer. I cook a big batch of beans at least once a week, and then I freeze them in 1 cup or 2 cup portions. So I have them for recipes. So I've got my beans that were cooked, frozen, pulled them out, defrosted them. So now I'm going to use some of my beans and then a can of black beans, just because I want a little variety in it. I'm just going to drain off some of the water from the beans and give them a little rinse. Canned beans are convenient, but I still prefer to mostly to cook my own. But I thought I would do kind of a compromise here and do a little bit of both. So we've got the tomatoes in there. Now I'm going to add my beans. And I think I should have used a bigger pan, but we'll make it work. I used my trusty cast iron skillet, and then I said, wait a minute, I've got 2 cans of beans I'm putting in here.
Allie, can we go back to salt quickly?
Sure.
Firstly, your salt cellar is incredible, and like I said in the chat, we sell it in our wellness department. Um, but secondly, I just want to ask you what salt you use to cook. I feel like folks get caught in the pattern of using like table salt or iodized salt. But just want to hear what your opinion is on that.
That's a great question because that also depends. That's why I almost never put an amount of salt when I'm writing my recipes. I'll say salt to taste because again, if a recipe calls for salt, but it doesn't tell you kosher salt or sea salt, that's a huge difference because a tablespoon of kosher salt is equal to a half a tablespoon of sea salt in terms of saltiness. So if you were to compare the two, you'd get a very different product if you used one or the other. It could be either very oversalted or very undersalted. Because kosher salt doesn't, it doesn't weigh as much as the same amount of sea salt. Sea salt is a lot saltier, so you'd use less of it. I use a combination. I use kosher salt, and I also use sea salt, sometimes Himalayan, sometimes just regular sea salt, but I use a fine grind of a sea salt. But if I'm salting, for example, if I'm salting my pasta water, I don't need to use a fancy salt. Always salt my pasta water, but that kosher salt is fine for that. So certain things I'll use kosher salt, and certain things I'll use sea salt. But again, because I'm using my hands, I know how much salt I'm putting in there. And so if I'm using sea salt, I'm feeling how different that feels. And I'm knowing, okay, that's going to be a lot, like this amount of sea salt and this amount of kosher salt. I know how salty that is. And that's a good way for you to learn how to salt things. Because if you keep doing it and then tasting as you cook, which I also insist you must taste as you cook. Don't wait till the end of the recipe and it comes out of the oven and you think it tastes terrible. You got to taste it along the way. So I'm going to taste this before we put it in the lasagna layers because I don't want to find out after it comes out that it needed more something. So does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely.
And then some, right?
Yeah.
All right, so I am going to add some greens now. So I already went ahead and stripped my kale. You can use kale, spinach, doesn't matter. Just because I didn't think watching me strip the kale leaves was going to be that fascinating and I wanted a lot of greens. Although now I'm trying to figure out how they're going to fit in my pan, but I'm not too worried. But I did want to show you my tried and true method of stripping the leaves. You do not have to take your knife and you do not have to cut the kale. You've taken any of my live cooking classes, this is always in my classes. Pick up the kale leaf, you take one hand holding the stem and the other hand, you just pull this off. Then if you want to chop it up real small and use your knife, you can, or you can just tear it up like this, add it to my water. And I always wash my greens in a bucket, or if I need a lot, in the sink, because if they're dirty, all the dirt will fall to the bottom and then we just pull them up and all the dirt stays. If you do it in a colander and you spray them, the water's just going to, the dirt is just going to sit in the bottom with the kale. So if you want, and you want to keep this dry, then you can put this in a colander after. But I like to keep some of the cooking water, whether I'm sauteing the greens separately or I'm adding them to something like a soup or like we're going to do now. So I'm going to go ahead and add some greens and give my polenta a stir. It's really thickening up a lot quicker than I thought, which is great. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and add some greens here. Okay, and then I'm going to put a lid on my skillet so it'll come up to temperature a little bit quicker and help wilt the greens. Because I want to build my lasagna. All right, put these greens aside because our second dish is going to use a lot of greens. So I've got them all ready. Okay, so I chose corn tortillas for my lasagna. You can use flour, whatever you want. doesn't matter. I just kind of like the corn tortillas, just as a little variety. I also just like the texture, the way they kind of become more noodly. They sort of fall apart a little bit more than the flour tortillas, which I kind of like, because then it just becomes one big sort of casserole. So I'm gonna get my skillet. Not my skillet, my pan. So I'm just gonna use, I've got this little, like, I think it's like 8x8, and I'm gonna use that for my lasagna. And I've already grated some cheese. You can certainly buy shredded cheese if you want. I just be really careful when you buy shredded cheeses, because a lot of times the pre-shredded cheeses have other stuff added to them, so they don't get all sticky. Sometimes they have flour or gums. Not that they're bad for you, but I just prefer just cheese. So I just grated my cheese a little bit earlier. I'm gonna go check here. I'm actually gonna give my polenta a taste and see, because it cooked up really quickly. But I don't know if it's cooked properly, because I don't want it to taste gritty. I want it to taste creamy. So if it still has that grittiness to it, I'm going to add more water to it. You also can add, if you wanted, you could cook, instead of water, you could use vegetable stock or chicken stock. If you wanted to get a little deeper flavor, I find that I really like the corn flavor. So water's just fine for me. And then add a little bit of butter at the very end, vegan butter or regular butter, and it just adds a really nice kind of flavor to it. So I'm just going to give it a little taste, see how we're doing. Oh, it's really good. I think we're actually there. Doesn't taste really gritty to me. I do need more salt. I did not put enough salt in it. So I'm going to give it a little salt. And this is one of those things, you go to a restaurant and they have polenta on the menu and it sounds so fancy. It is so inexpensive. Ground cornmeal, and you can really, the toppings that you put on it, you can really dress it up and make it into something so fancy. You really could put anything on it, and you can eat it for breakfast, lunch, dinner, doesn't matter. We're gonna do a bunch of vegetables on it, but you could even make a polenta lasagna. If you put layers of the polenta and then you did tomatoes and zucchini and all the kind of lasagna things that you would put in there with cheese or without. It's so versatile and it's so inexpensive. So it's one of my favorites. So I taught, I remember I taught a budget cooking class for Oriana a couple of years ago and in person, and just had 4 different recipes, all sort of inexpensive, and polenta was on there because it is, I mean, polenta and a can of beans, you have dinner for 4 for probably like $3 at the most. Again, you'd want to add a little more than that, but that's your basic ingredients, and then you just flavor it however you like. So I'm going to check and see if my greens have wilted, and they have nicely. I may actually add, if I have enough space in my pan, I may add some more greens as we go along, because they'll cook once they're in here, and I just like a lot of greens in my lasagna. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the pan over so I can build with you guys watching. My skillet. Hey, now really, I could just take this and put some tortillas on top, put it in the oven, and that would be really good too. It would be like a skillet lasagna. But we're going to go ahead and make the original recipe, because I'm like, that looks really good. So I do want to give a little oil into my pan. I think my recipe says to spray it, but I tend to not have spray around. So I'm just going to put a little bit of oil in there and rub it around old-fashioned way with my hands. Just so the tortillas, we'll have a lot of sauce in here, but just so the tortillas don't stick. So depending on how many tortillas your package has, I don't know if this is 8 or 10. You'll kind of want to arrange them in that way. So I think I'm going to do 3. Let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3 on top. Okay, I'm going to do 3 on the bottom, and I'm just going to rip so it kind of fills the bottom in nicely. Then I'm going to go ahead and start scooping my filling. And you can do as many layers as you want, again, depending on how many tortillas you have and what size pan. You can make this in a big, double the size of this and double the recipe. And you can make a really nice large amount. I think I'm just going to do, let's see, what do I have for tortillas here? I have 1 more. Okay, 1 more layer here. And then I'm going to do 3 at the top. No, I'm going to do 2 at the top. So let me get another one. So I get a nicer layer there. Okay, just going to go ahead and pour the rest of the filling out. Oops, I forgot to put my cheese in the middle layer. So we'll have a little less cheese. I'm going to put some cheese in this layer then, since I forgot it on the second layer. Can't really go back in and do that. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my tortillas so I can cover the whole top and just sort of put them like that. Put the rest of the cheese on top. And then I'm going to put it in the oven. All right. Give my pan a quick rinse, and then we're going to start on the next recipe. All right, got my pan back on. And so now we're going to go ahead and make our polenta topping because we got our polenta. It's already cooked. And now we're just going to put what we're going to put on it. So let me grab. I'm going to do mushrooms, onions. I should probably look at my recipe. See what I said? Yes. Okay. Mushrooms and onions, and I've got some beans and lots of greens. This recipe is going to have a lot of greens. So go ahead and take my onion again.
I have another question, Allie. You pulled out that magic quart container of beans from your fridge/freezer. I'm wondering like what other things you just always have around, or like special prepared things in your fridge, because that blew my mind.
Really, I usually have a variety of beans in there. So right now I have white beans in there. I have pinto beans in there. It's like I have cans of things but they're frozen. I'll usually have lentils. Even though lentils cook really quickly, sometimes I want to just really cook even quicker. So maybe I want to cook some rice, but I don't want to cook rice and lentils. So I'll cook some rice. I'll have lentils in the freezer and I'll dump them on. But speaking of grains, I do the same thing. If I cook a big batch of rice, I'll freeze some rice. If I cook a big batch of quinoa, I'll freeze the quinoa. Almost any grain that you make, you can do the same thing with. You can throw it in your freezer. Of course, yeah, it's going to lose a little bit of it, of the quality of the freshness. But generally, if you're mixing rice and beans and you want to make burritos and you have rice and beans in your freezer, it's perfectly fine. The only thing I probably wouldn't do that with is pasta. I don't think I do a bunch of pasta ahead and freeze it.
Yeah.
But any kind of grain, it's perfect for.
That's a great tip for bulk shoppers who want to get all of their like random baggies of stuff out of their pantry and into the fridge where you're actually going to use them. Because I've always find myself like having those containers and
totally. Yeah. And then what happens is you have all those containers, because that's what I have. I have my pantry has the same thing. It has all of my dried things, but then I open it and I say, oh, that's going to take an hour. That's going to take 20 minutes. That's going to take, but I open my freezer and it's already cooked for me. And it takes away the overwhelmingness too. I think for some people, like cooking beans from scratch, like it's a whole project. It's not really, but it's a project that you can do and then you're set for a week. You know, if you take that hour and all you really do is putting the beans on, and then you can go do whatever else you want. And it really just will save a ton of time and money. It's a lot cheaper. I'm just going to throw the onions in, a little oil in my pan. Get the nice sizzle. So yes, I'm a big proponent of having my freezer stocked. I feel like freezers are very underutilized for what they're good for. Besides frozen dinners, you know, you can have frozen dinners if you have frozen rice and beans in your freezer, and frozen tortillas. I have frozen tortillas in there. I take them out, I can make burritos. So I don't have to buy frozen burritos. The other thing that, what was I thinking of for having your freezer? Oh, so if you make, if you have a recipe and it calls for tomato paste, we all use a tablespoon of tomato paste. And then we're like, what am I going to do with this can? Well, I put it in my freezer. Either I put it in a sort of a shallow container that I can take a spoon in and scoop it out, or I'll put it in ice cube trays and then have the little ice cube trays, put them in a little container, and then I pull out a tablespoon if I need another tablespoon. I do that with coconut milk because sometimes I don't need a whole can of coconut milk. So I'll put that in little ice cube trays. Or I will just freeze the whole container, because next time if I used a half a can, I might use the half a can. So always think, for me, that's also really helps to prevent food waste, because I'll buy it, then I'll put the half a can of coconut milk in my fridge. I'll forget it's there. And I could have used it, but I forgot it was there, and I open it and I'm like, ooh, no, that doesn't look so good. I did find out coconut milk does go bad. I didn't think coconut milk could go bad. I thought it's not dairy, but it can definitely go bad. So I would recommend freezing it as opposed to abandoning it in your refrigerator. So I'm just cutting up some onions here. And for this recipe, if you want to get really fancy, I think getting some mixed, because it's so cheap, the rest of the recipe with the polenta and onions and kale, you want to go and get yourself some really fancy mushrooms for this dish. That's how you can like level it up to something that's a little bit more gourmet, if you want to. I'm just using brown mushrooms, you know, little baby bellas or creminis, brown creminis. I'm going to go ahead, and my onions are softened. So now I'm going to go ahead and add my mushrooms. Just let them all do their thing. And what the mushrooms will do is now the mushrooms will let out a little bit of water. So I'm not going to salt them till the mushrooms let out some water, because if I add the salt now, the mushrooms will ooze out a little too quickly and then they'll lose their mushroomness. So that's a little trick with mushrooms, is you want to let them kind of naturally let their water out and then salt them afterwards, because then the flavor will be intensified, because salt helps draw water out of foods. So by adding it too early, we're going to lose some of that flavor. So, and I didn't do what I said that I recommended you do and cut my garlic first, probably because I was talking too much. But I can cut it and let it sit on the board for a little while, because I want to cook the mushrooms and the garlic down. Don't want to burn the garlic. So adding it a little bit later also will help prevent you from burning the garlic. If I add it too early and I have the pan up, I have the pan up a little high because I want the onions to caramelize and the mushrooms to really intensify their flavor. So the pan's up a little high. So it's kind of good that I'll just let it sit here for a little bit and release the Allison. Okay, we got our garlic. And what else have we got? Clean up a little here. For this, we're going to use, let me just check on my polenta. I turned it off, but just want to check on the salt level. And then what I'll do is I'll just add a little tablespoon. It's all cooked, so I'm just going to leave it staying warm. I'm going to add a little tablespoon of butter to it. And then I don't know if I'm going to put cheese on this one. I may do nutritional yeast for this, but it's really nice with Parmesan cheese or cheddar cheese, whatever you're having it go with. With the mushrooms and the kale, it might be really nice with goat cheese also. And it's delicious. Score. Okay, so for this, again, I have white beans in my freezer, but I thought I'll just use a can. And again, I'm going to give it a little bit of a rinse. I just don't love all the kind of water that's in there. It's not like anything terrible. And it rinses away a little bit of the salt. If you do buy canned beans and you can get no salt added, that's a little bit better, because then you can control the salt more. I do try when I can for certain things that I know I'm going to be cooking in a complete recipe, as opposed to just like eating out of the can. I try to get no salt added products when I can, because then I know how much salt I'm putting in there. So again, so I'm not going to add these yet, just going to kind of get them ready. Give my onions and mushrooms.
We have a question in the chat, Allie. You may have already addressed this, but do you soak your beans before cooking them?
I'm sorry?
Do you soak your beans before cooking them?
I do. But I've read many essays on beans and soaking versus non-soaking. Apparently a lot of people don't, and they cook just as quickly. There've been all these, different cooking sites that do these experiments. Do they cook faster? Do they not cook faster? I feel like they cook faster when I soak them, but I don't know. And I also feel like they help with the digestibility of them for people that have issues. I eat beans like every day, so I don't really have issues, like digestion issues. But for people that that maybe don't, although everybody really, if you took my Blue Zones class, which Libby did, you should eat beans every day. at least once a day, if you want to live to be a centenarian. But anyway, you should just eat beans once a day because beans are delicious and there's so many different great types of beans. But that being said, some people don't digest them as well. But I also think that comes with eating them often. A lot of times people will start eating beans and being like, oh my gosh, I can't, they hurt too much. And maybe they will at the beginning. And maybe you just have to sort of do baby steps. And again, I'm not a medical professional. So if you, if you really can't digest beans, don't eat them. But for most people, I think it's just getting used to it, and your body getting used to it. It's a lot of fiber, and the American diet really doesn't have enough fiber in it. And it's a great way to get more fiber in your diet. And also an inexpensive way to get more fiber. So back to my mushrooms. They're really looking nice now. Let's see if I can, the magic of television, show you. See, they're not really, there's no water or anything in the pan because I have it pretty high. And so all the water that's evaporating, but the mushrooms are getting a nice color on them. So they're keeping their shape, they're keeping their flavor. So now I can go ahead, add my garlic, lower the heat, and add my salt and pepper. And I'm going to add a little bit more oil just to where I added the garlic. And I'm lowering my heat, adding some pepper. Nice. 2 pinches of salt. All right. Let's see. We've got the mushrooms, and the garlic, and then we're going to add the kale. So again, I got a lot of kale here. So I'm going to go ahead, but we all know kale cooks down. So now that my mushrooms, my onions, my garlic, everything's going good, I'm going to add my kale. And put my lid on. And then once that cooks down, I am going to add my beans, warm it all up, and then put it on my polenta. So there we go. What time we got? It's 10 minutes, and technically our dinners are ready. So I made 2 dinners. Yes, one is still in the oven. But really, there was a lot of talking going on. So if I really focused, I think I could have prepared that dinner much quicker. And like I said, if you want to do that lasagna, and I think it'd be a really fun project to do with kids to do that. You could use a jar of salsa. And again, that would cut down, you wouldn't have that cooking part. You wouldn't even have to heat up your beans. You can take the salsa, add the salsa, the beans, put everything in your lasagna pan. And again, you can put whatever you want in there, whatever you like in your Mexican food. And the best part of this lasagna is once it comes out, then you get to put the avocado on there and the sour cream and whatever else you want to put on there to make it delicious. So I'm going to take a peek and see how it's doing. It's probably got at least another 15 minutes or so, but do want to, oh, it's looking really good. I'm going to take it out. So, see, we've got a nice crusty, cheesy top, and our layers are cooking. You can kind of see, because I use the glass bowl, but I'm going to let it cook a little bit more. Get back in there, and then I'm going to check on my kale to see if it's wilted, and then I will add my beans. It's getting there. Go ahead and add them. That way they'll warm up. And I can show you how pretty everything looks all together. Because I kind of would like to put the polenta in a little bowl and put it on top so you can see how pretty and how fancy you could make it. So does anybody have questions? No questions?
Yeah, people can drop questions in the chat or unmute if you're feeling brave. Although it's only, what is it, 7, 8 of us? So not too many people. What kind of salad would you serve this with?
With the lasagna or with the?
I am not sure. It was question, either or both.
Either or both. Okay, so let's see. If I was going to do the lasagna, the Mexican lasagna, I don't know that I would do a salad, but if I did, I probably would do like a quick cabbage slaw with it. Because I think the creaminess and the heaviness of the lasagna, just a nice kind of a vinegary slaw would be really nice with the Mexican salad. And then again, because you're going to probably have some guacamole on there and some sour cream, it's going to be pretty rich. So you want something kind of light and crunchy. So that I would do that. I might not do a salad for the polenta because we have so many greens in there that I feel like I've got my greens quotient there. But if I did, I might do something very simple, just a simple light dressed, some sort of a oil vinegar, or maybe if you wanted to be really fancy, you could do my vegan Caesar, which is delicious if you've not tried it. Or you can do a Caesar salad, a traditional Caesar salad, which would be kind of nice with it. But I feel like the greens really take care of the green part of that. So I might save, instead of having a salad, maybe if you were going to do this for like kind of a fancy-ish sort of dinner, I might do some fun appetizer for it, or do a really special dessert if you wanted to make a nice meal out of it. Because I think this really would be a really beautiful meal. And again, if you wanted to use the fancy mushrooms and use a fancy cheese to top it with, either a goat cheese or something really, really special. I mean, there's lots of good small cheese producers. You can get something really fancy. And since the rest of the meal really didn't cost very much, it's a nice little treat. So let me go check on my kale to see how we're doing.
So I know you freeze all of your beans and grains and rice, but do you also freeze veggies or kale?
I will freeze. I mean, if I had a garden, yes, I would totally freeze a garden, whatever I grew in the garden, but I don't. But when I get a lot of kale and when kale's in season, like my beautiful kale plant that I have over here, I will pull it off. I will blanch it. And I'll put it in little freezer bags and keep it in my freezer because I always add greens to a soup, to a stew. I'll just throw a handful of greens and they freeze perfectly. You don't have to blanch them. You can freeze them raw, but the texture is a little bit different. And I just prefer to freeze them already cooked. So I'll usually just quick dip them in some hot water, blanch them, and then put them in little freezer bags to have a portion of them frozen. So that's really the only that I freeze would be that. All right, so I'm gonna get a little bowl just so I can show you how pretty this can be. It's just a little bowl. You can also do it if you want to kind of do it the classic, like if you were doing this for this meal, they'd probably feed about 4 people. What you can do is, actually, this would be really pretty. And I could do it that way. Actually, I'm going to do it that way. I'm going to show you. You can put it in a little bowl and put it on top, but I think this will be the really pretty presentation way. So I'm going to show you. Okay, so I've got my polenta, put it on a really nice platter, and I'm going to spread it around. And then I'm going to put my kale all around it, and people will be able to just scoop as they wish. Oh, this looks so pretty. I'm so glad I had this idea. Okay, so we've just got it. And then again, you can crumble the cheese right in the middle. And then people can just serve themselves. If you have an oven-proof platter like this, if you wanted, you could put the cheese on top, throw it under the broiler for a minute, and it would get all crispy and crunchy. Let's take out the lasagna. Now, the big question is, what am I going to eat for dinner? Because I have 2 dinners tonight and they both look so good. So here we go. We've got our lasagna. Take my my lasagna and my polenta, and ta-da! We've got 2 dinners in under an hour.
Well done. Always so impressive what you can pull off
Well,
in an hour.
I wish all of you could come share this, because this is way too much food for my boyfriend and I to eat.
Oh, you can freeze it. Freeze it.
That's true.
Now I learned one thing in this
fun.
class. Yeah. That's awesome. Does anyone have any last questions? People are talking about the ways they like to eat polenta too in here. We also have a cook along.
Awesome.
Paola is cooking along and saying that the food smells incredible.
Oh, good.
And is happy to learn the new tip about the garlic, releasing the allicin.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I'm very impressed when there's a cook along. The last class there was one cook along too. It's a lot to commit to.
Oh, we had 2 cook alongs actually.
2. Awesome.
Yes, Kimberly. Awesome.
Great.
Fabulous.
Well, I hope you report back on how everything tastes and how you.
I know. I was like, can you send us pictures, please, or tag us on Instagram at OrianaTC if you cooked along.
Yes.
Great. Well, if there are no other questions, do you have anything else you would like to add, Allie?
No, I mean, I'm sad that this is my last class for the winter.
I know.
Maybe we'll get some, I know spring and summer tends to be not the time we do cooking classes because everybody's out playing. But hopefully in the fall. And if anybody wants to, I would love if the people who did the cook along sent me pictures of their food, or just let me know how it was. You can go through Oriana, or I'm on Instagram, Healthy Chef Allie, or you can email me, whatever you choose. But just thank you for sharing part of your evening with me and finding what I have. I just love to share. I just love to share and teach people that cooking can be fun and delicious and easy. And so thanks for letting me do that.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that passion with us. And if you loved Allie's class and you would like to see her back, as we would, I'm sending a quick cooking class evaluation form in the chat. If you have any class ideas or just want to see more of Allie in our fall programming, let us know and let us know what we can do to improve these classes too, because we're always looking to improve. So that's all. Thank you everyone for tuning in this evening and spending your evening learning about some new wholesome ways to cook delicious food. So thank you everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.